keep having conversations with people. It almost feels like Groundhog's Day, where people are bringing up ideas that they have about the way things should go. For example, talking to one person and they're feeling a lot of stress because the city that they live in seems to be building everywhere. This person is worried it's going to bring more people to the city. There are going to be more cars. It'll be harder to get around. The city planners don't have everybody in mind, and it's all downhill from here. Another person talking about dating and wanting to find a husband and feeling panic because they're on the apps and they can't ever find the right guy. And it's always going to be like this, and they are going to be old and lonely forever. And it keeps occurring to me that this is what that Mercury in retrograde is all about. Jupiter in retrograde is also contributing to this. The week that we just had, where the sun made all of those connections to all of those planets, and this week ahead, Venus is making a ton of connections. And really, what it boils down to is that we are being asked to look at the way our lives are heading and where we've come from, and then figure out what makes the most sense moving forward. But a lot of us get stuck in our old perspectives, our old perceptions, our ways of thinking, if this doesn't happen, what if I end up old and alone and lonely? Or what if I end up living in an overcrowded place that no longer fits my needs? We have this tendency to go into worst case scenario because we're stuck in what we have always believed. And what we believe goes way back through our history because it corroborates experiences that we've had. And then it also goes into our conditioning, the things that we were taught as we were growing up. And the astrology right now says, let's challenge that. Let's not stay stuck in those ruts, in those old neural pathways that drive you to fear. Every time it's all of those worries and we go straight to fear. What if worst case scenario? What if something bad happens and I can't recover? What if, what if, what if? So we're going to talk about it. This week, the astrology brings us more shifting and changing and a push to reevaluate where we are putting our focus, what we are valuing, and all of the good stuff. I'm Nafa Perkins of Electra Astrology. This is the path ahead, my weekly forecast. I'm going to break down the astrology through that psychological, spiritual, astrological lens so that you can self-inquire, understand a little bit more about what drives you for better or for worse, so that if you need to make changes, and you probably feel it in your system, things like anxiety or anger or frustration, those are all indicators that your higher self wants you to make some changes. So we're going to go into it. If you like my style and you would like to book a reading with me, November is fully booked. December, so far so good, but the calendar is booking up quickly. So if you would like to book a reading, I have package options as well, which are the most affordable ones. And then I also have the recorded readings, which I've been talking about a lot lately. These are my stream of consciousness transmissions for you, essentially from your higher self to me, from me to you. You can check all of that out at electraastrology.com. So let's jump into the charts. So I want to bring you back to last week where we watched the sun. And the sun is always informing us about who we are now, who we have become, who we used to be. And we're getting rid of a lot of that outdated programming. The version of you that was running the show when you were 16, they're not here anymore. That version of you that got married the first time, they're not here anymore. The version of you that was a young parent and now you have teenagers, the young parent isn't here anymore. We keep welcoming new versions of who we are. But if we are on autopilot, we just go along thinking, oh, it's just me. I'm here. But I want you to look through all of your experiences, even that you've had in the last 5 years since COVID. And COVID was such a delineator of the old you and the new you. So just think about all of the pieces of the new you that have come on board, the parts of you that are no longer here. You're not as shy. You're not as powerless. You're not as busy. Those are examples, but we want to give some acknowledgement to who we used to be. That's the version that has gotten you to this point. and then who you have become. And then, of course, there's this mysterious who you will be in the future that is still to be revealed. Because we did so much sun work last week and we had that new moon in Scorpio, which was pretty deep, pretty heavy. I think it brought up for most people everything that you guys have shared with me, whom I've done readings with, and also on a personal level, a lot of hidden beliefs, those unconscious things that were running the show, right? Those beliefs around I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I've always believed this, or I have a prejudice against that, or I tend to pull in a certain kind of toxic person. We did some self discovery last week. So just take a minute and think, what did you learn about yourself last week? What did you learn about some of the ways that you have been coping or not coping very well? And you'll know something should rise up to your mind pretty fast when I ask that question. We've just come off of the sun making a sextile to Pluto. And today on Monday, it is making a sextile to Ceres. And yesterday, Sunday, it made a sextile to Pluto. So the sun work has not stopped. We're still getting ideas. We're still getting some clarifications on some of our personal details. The sun making a trine to Ceres is asking you, what do you have to let go of? The mythology of Ceres is that she eventually had to let her child go off into the world. She had to let this person that she had tended to so lovingly go out. And if you think about it, sometimes we tend to our things a little lovingly, like, oh, this is an old belief that feels very familiar and comforting, and I'm going to hold on to it and tend to it. And maybe you have to let it go. Maybe we're talking literally about things that have to do with the body. I love coffee so much, even though it doesn't make me feel good, and I can't quite let it go because it's my comfort item in the morning. Maybe it is time to let coffee go. That's a silly example, but we are looking at releasing something out into the world as the sun is connecting with Ceres. And it might actually come in as something that you realize you need to do to support yourself. Ceres is the goddess of the cultivated land, and the cultivated land in our case is our bodies. So do be paying attention this week. Weave that question into your comings and your goings. What does my body need? What is my body trying to tell me? Because you are highly supported right now while listening to your body to make changes that need to be made. We also see here that Mars is in a square to the nodes. So the nodes are asking us to discard the things that we feel that we need to manage and micromanage and control in favor of going with the dynamic flow, allowing things to leave that need to leave, allowing things to come that need to come, regardless of whether we think they should leave or come. And Mars being in Sagittarius, making this square, we've had a lot of this Sagittarian energy. The sun has just moved into Sag, but we had Jupiter go retrograde last week. We have Mars in Sagittarius. We have Mercury in retrograde that began its retrograde in Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is all about necessity of changing the way that you see things. Sagittarius is great energy for seeing the bigger picture and not getting so stuck in the tiny little details. People, or maybe it's you, that get lost in the minutia. You get lost in the details. You get so stuck on the potentials of something, the what ifs, well, should I stay here? Should I stay there? Should I buy this? Should I buy that? Is this brand cheaper? Is this brand more expensive? What does so and so have to say about this? Maybe I need their opinion. These are all Gemini things. They're all the detail things. And trying to get into the details right now is not supported. We're being asked to look at the bigger picture and discard those beliefs. Maybe a lot of growth feels stressful, but that doesn't mean Just because you believe that a lot of growth means it's going to ruin your city doesn't make it true. Trying to find the love of your life, not being able to find him or her, and having a belief that you'll never be able to find him or her does not make it true. So that's what Mars is really asking us to do, to either challenge those beliefs that feel kind of toxic and heavy and icky that you've always believed, or maybe it's not about challenging them. Maybe it's about setting them aside to be open to something different. You know that saying, this or something better. So that's what Mars squaring the nodes is asking you to consider this week. And it is interesting that we're headed into the holidays in the US, Thanksgiving. And this is a time when people gather with family, and not everybody does so well with family. So this is a great week to be practicing the this or something better mentality. Just because you expect it to be a certain way doesn't mean that it will be. But you do have a choice in choosing your perception. Maybe you just have some little laughs with yourself. Maybe you have some inside jokes with yourself. So if something goes wrong, you kind of laugh. You can always lighten your own mood when you make a point to do that. Now, this is a loud Venus week, so let's start off talking here. We see that Mercury in retrograde, which is now in Scorpio, is meeting with Venus. So Mercury in retrograde in Scorpio is asking us to go deep and to look at the limiting details that keep us stuck. So the part of your mind that wants to get lost in the weeds of what ifs, or of maybe I shouldn't do this because here's all the reasons why it could go bad. Maybe I should do it. Here's 10 pros. Maybe I shouldn't do it. Here's 10 cons. A lot of times that can be very distracting, and it can just keep us on edge, or it can keep us mired in our thought processes of difficulty. So I can always tell when somebody is stuck in their Scorpio, and we all have Scorpio, so we all get stuck in there. But the Scorpio mentality is the one where your arms are crossed and you just have this attitude of like, well, whatever. They're going to do that to themselves. They deserve that. That was their fault. I'm done with this. That's a very Mercury and Scorpio kind of attitude. So we bring Venus in, and Venus says we have to figure out what our values are here. So if you find yourself arms crossed, sneer on your face, just disgusted with somebody, or wanting to retaliate against somebody, or just done, I'm done, I can't deal. When you find yourself in that mentality this week, that's when you really have to go to that Venus energy inside of you and say, you know what are my values here? Is it more important that I stay angry and disgusted and withdrawn and withholding and blaming? Is that my value here? Is that my core value? Or is my core value maybe to understand why I feel so angry, or to question why I feel so powerless? You know, that's always the deal with Scorpio, is that the powerlessness drives us into the anger, the disgust, the withholding. Venus here is saying, let's back off a little bit. Because if my value is to have a functional relationship, maybe me with my arms crossed giving somebody the proverbial finger isn't supportive of the relationship. If my value is feeling powerful, maybe me blaming somebody else for a problem is a way that I'm actually giving my power away. So be looking at that. And it's a tricky week in the US. Everybody knows that these holidays, while they can be joyous and exciting, oftentimes bring up a lot of the deeper stuff that we all have just from growing up, being human on the planet. On the 25th, Venus starts to get really busy. She makes this trine to Jupiter, and then this quincunx over to Chiron. So Venus trining Jupiter. Jupiter is in Cancer, blowing up the emotions. Jupiter is currently in retrograde, so it's asking you to look at your emotional reactivity. Okay, so this is sort of along that same storyline. It's like, you know, emotional reactivity oftentimes does look like, I'm mad, I'm annoyed, I can't deal, this person sucks, I feel victimized, I'm over it. We're going to use our big emotions this week, places where we get the most annoyed or we feel the most hurt, you know, even things like sadness or feeling rejected or maybe you didn't get invited to do something with somebody that you really wanted to. Look at all of the bigger emotional reactions and say, once again, like, okay, first of all, get curious. Like, what is this teaching me? What is this showing me about myself and my situations? Because Jupiter asks you to zoom out and look at the big picture, not get stuck in the little minutia, not get stuck in the little details, right? Like, they didn't text me back. That means this. That's a detail. Zooming out, what am I making it mean? So that's a big question for you this week. What am I making this mean? What is the story that I'm telling myself that this is about? And again, come back to that value. What are my values in this scenario? Is my value to have peace? Is my value to self inquire? Is my value to find a solution? Then that becomes the guiding force, not the emotional reactivity. And then, of course, as we watch Venus make this connection to Chiron, and it's a quincunx. So, quincunxes aren't the loudest, but they are anxiety producing. So when you feel valueless, which Chiron shows us our wound. So when you don't feel like you have value, or your self-confidence is down, or you feel that you have lack, you're going to say, where is this from? And then what do I wish to have in this situation? What do I wish to learn from this situation? And in that way, you gather your power back. On Wednesday, we have Venus making a trine to Saturn. This is great because Saturn does provide a grounding force. Saturn does remind you that you are the king of your castle, that you are the CEO of this corporation called you, and that you can react to things from a solid, grounded, logical place, and that you can face any problem that arises and actually learn from it. So when questions about your abundance or your lack, your self-confidence or your lack thereof, or even those things that feel like they're coming in and like pulling the rug out from under you, because Venus is in Scorpio after all. Venus is at detriment in Scorpio. Venus would much rather be in Taurus. So Venus is struggling. And, we're all kind of feeling that because Venus is one of our power players. But Saturn is going to come in here with some ground, and it's going to remind you that there are things that are greater than you. There are forces that are working in your favor. Just because you feel alone and lonely doesn't mean you are. Just because you feel like it's like the very worst thing could possibly happen doesn't mean that it will. So this is also a reminder to take some time to be alone, to say some prayers, to connect with yourself, to connect with your higher self. On the 28th, we have Saturn stationing to go direct. Okay, so we're kind of feeling this all week too, by the way. Saturn is not super comfy in Pisces. It hasn't felt like a comfortable energy, definitely not to me anyway. And I know from talking to a lot of you that it hasn't really been a walk in the park. Saturn has been in Pisces, in and out of Pisces for about 3 years. And now finally, Saturn is officially on its journey to get out of Pisces, and it will hit Aries as it was in Aries for a few months this spring/summer. So finally, Saturn goes direct. Saturn in Pisces has been about the spiritual journey, the spiritual lessons. And spiritual lessons are hard lessons because they're very confusing and they don't have goals, they don't have rewards, they don't have timelines. And Saturn is an energy within all of us that likes that. We want the structure. We want to know what's going to happen. We want rules to follow. And ultimately, we want success and we want the accolades that come with success. But Saturn in Pisces has been very nebulous, very hard to understand even what success means. So this is also a good week where you just sit back and you just think, wow, when it comes to my relationship to my own spirituality, my relationship to my higher power, even my relationship to my deeper sense of self, my higher self, that part of me that isn't so swayed by all the human things, but is this solid, grounded soul that is within me. What have I learned over the last 3 years? And what are the lessons that I'm going to take with me? What have I mastered when it comes to these very confusing but higher level themes, the intricacies of this reality and the things beyond this reality? You're going to be getting some downloads about that this week, and they will continue over the next several months until Saturn enters Aries, and then it'll be a whole other set of lessons, which we'll talk about. All right, so on the 29th, Venus, once again, I said Venus is pretty busy. Venus is 29 Scorpio, which means that she is in opposition to Uranus and she is in a trine to Neptune. So let's just start off with Uranus. Uranus is the agent of change, and Uranus is in Venus's sign. So Uranus in Taurus has been challenging our relationship to security and to stability. It has been asking us to look at how we view our money, how we take care of our bodies, and what safety and security means to us. So, in relationship to Venus, we're doing more of this evaluation. Now, Venus has been an aspect to Uranus in Taurus for years. So, this opposition, with both of these being at 29, this is the last time that Venus is going to oppose Uranus in the sign that Venus rules. So, you might get some downloads about what has changed, how your values have changed, how you relate to your own divine feminine, what you have learned about this part of you that desires, that yearns, that is attracted to things, that wants beauty, that wants stability, that is powerful enough to make money, to bring abundance into your life, to create resources that you can count on. So, again, downloads. What's coming in? What are you able to see about yourself that feels strong and grounded and solid, especially as it relates to your sense of having and your sense of lack? And hopefully at this point, your sense of having is greater than your sense of lack. If you are working with a lot of lack right now, this is a great time to do what we talked about earlier, which is maybe look at changing some of your perspective or your perception. A little step to the right of the way that you've always seen things could be life-changing for you. And that's all mind stuff. So we're working on that Mercury having more control over your own mind. And Venus is kind of facilitating that this week with this aspect. Now, Venus is also trining Neptune. Neptune is the premier spiritual teacher. So you're also tuning into the things that are bigger than you. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about money and abundance, that it feels like I have to have literal money in my hands in order to feel abundant. I have to have literal food on my plate in order to feel abundant. And Neptune here is reminding you that abundance can be found anywhere. And in fact, abundance is everywhere. It is what? Change in perspective, a change in perception. Okay, so it's big work right now, and it's all very self-directed. It's all very subtle, and it all requires that sense of presence, that sense of knowing yourself, of being able to identify when you have slipped off into anxiety or that arms crossed, I'm mad about this energy, and you come back to yourself and you say, okay, I have to see this in a different way. I have to shine a different kind of light on this. And if you're unable to do that for yourself, then you turn to your higher power and you say, God, help me to see this differently and let some magic happen. And finally, in relationship to what I just said, Venus enters Sagittarius. So that puts the Sun, Venus, Mars, Astra, Juno, all in Sagittarius, while Jupiter is in retrograde in Cancer. So again, a lot of perspective changing required. And you can look at where you need that change by the strong emotional reactions you're having. So whenever something feels icky or sticky or tricky or prickly or annoying, that's where you start. I feel awful. I need to change this. How can I change it? All right, you guys. I hope this was helpful, and I will talk to you all soon.